Welcome back to the Everything Property Podcast. Come tax time, today's guest should be your best friend. He's known for the occasional triathlon or cycle, appearing or hosting his own podcasts, his fast cars, and according to Google, a musical artist. I don't know if you knew that one, but
right.
I also consider him as the godfather of tax depreciation. He probably isn't old enough for that title, but he's been around talking about the subject for what seems like an eternity. He's the managing director at MCG, Quantity Surveyors. Mike Mortlock, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure. What an intro.
Yeah, perfect. I don't know if you knew that, but Google, first thing that comes up is musical artist. Mike Mortlock, musical artist.
Oh, I think there is some sort of DJ Mike Mortlock, maybe in the UK or something.
Okay, but it's your pick.
Is it?
Yeah, I'd roll on with it.
Well, my first job actually was a busker. So when I was, I think, 9 years old, I started busking on the streets.
Yeah.
And I had that sort of cute factor, cute-ish. Right?
Yeah, still cute, still got it.
Oh, thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
You're so sweet. I did used to sing for my supper back in the day. I used to play guitar at restaurants and that sort of stuff. So maybe that's come from an old bio. Who knows?
Yeah, you could be popping off on. Okay, fair enough. Well, look, talk to me a little bit past then. You've obviously, it's been a while since school in those days, but the early sort of start of your career, was it always quantity surveying? Was it always QS stuff, or where did you sort of find your feet and start to move into where you are now?
I'm going to glaze over. I think you just called me old then, because school has been admittedly a while ago.
Took a bit of a guess.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, no, you just look at my face and work backwards. No, it wasn't always quantity surveying. In fact, I've started some presentations before saying, like, when I was in kindergarten, I didn't stand up and say I want to be a quantity surveyor, because that'd be a weird kid.
That would be a weird kid. That would be interesting.
Weird kid.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be a fighter pilot, but I had some health issues that meant that wasn't a pathway for me. I got my pilot's license last year, so I still fly, but about like 1/10 of the speed.
Yeah, okay. Congrats.
Not quite the same. Yeah, thank you. So I was interested in property. I was interested in real estate, and I was very, very close to becoming a valuer. But then I got a job working for a quantity surveying firm, and they convinced me to change over my degree. And I realised that I quite enjoyed it. I'm an analytical sort of person. I love the data. I love property, not necessarily the nuts and bolts construction. So we have a traditional estimating part of our business. I'm kind of useless to those guys, because I'm much more of a high-level analytical sort of person. But, it's not something that I set out to do, but I do actually enjoy it. I wish we were creating a greater impact in the world, but I sort of try and pin us to the people that come through our doors. They're trying to fundamentally change their financial future, right? So if we're doing things to the best of our ability, then we're a partner in that journey. So that sort of gives me a little bit of a warm and fuzzy feeling.
Perfect. Well, that's probably a good segue into, we're in this foundation of the Everything Property Podcast when we're talking about building the team and the list of professionals that you're going to need on your journey. Obviously, a quantity surveyor will come into it, especially around tax time. But you're probably the best person to ask and the expert. But how does, if I'm a property investor and I own property, how do you sort of come into the equation, and how can you help in my property journey?
Yeah, when people talk about building a property team, quantity surveyors are kind of left off, because we're not necessarily part of the strategy, because depreciation is a bonus. Like, people shouldn't be looking for a type of property based on the deductions. But when they are narrowing it down, it is very helpful to have a relationship with a quantity surveyor, because you could be saying, all right, I'm looking at these two properties. Can you give me an idea about the deductions so I can do my sort of cash flow analysis? So it's worthwhile building a relationship with the quantity surveyor. But where we come in is really when you purchase that property. So when you're purchasing the property, we'll have an initial conversation just to get a sense of whether it's worthwhile to get a report done. And then, of course, we can look after that for the client. So tax time's obviously a big one, but we encourage people to get it done sort of straight away after they purchase the property, because some people wait too long and they miss out on deductions, and the stats on that are pretty horrifying.
Okay, so what's an example? So as soon as I'm purchasing the property, I should be getting in touch with the quantity surveyor. What about the age of the property and what I'm buying in particular? Does that matter?
It absolutely matters.
Yep.
And I think
Tell us a bit more about that.
If we were in a court, it'd be objection, leading the witness.
Yeah,
but you led me beautifully as an interviewer. The date does matter. But then in some respects, I like to say that it also doesn't matter, because when I go and say, okay, well, it needs to be built after the 16th of September 1987 to claim deductions on the original building structure, automatically people then go in their head, okay, well, if it's built in the 60s, then it's not going to be worthwhile. That's not necessarily true. And in fact, even some quantity surveyors I've heard saying new property is better for depreciation than old property. But that's not always true, right? Think, for example, a property that was just built brand new, a brand new house for $350,000. Now, it might give you, say, $15,000 worth of tax deductions in a year. Or you could contrast, let's say, a blue chip property that was built in the 1930s and has just had a $2 million renovation on it. Now, that's going to blow the trousers off that brand new property, because we're able to estimate the value of those renovations, and at the very least you're able to get a 2.5% depreciation claim each year. So if it's $1 million and it's $25,000 a year, right? So that's where the date does matter for what qualifies. So if it's brand new, you get the structure, you get the plant and equipment. If it's secondhand but it's built after 1987, you get the original bones. If it's pre-87, then we need to look at the history of the property. So it could have been built in the 70s and never been renovated, but that's quite unusual, because you think about how old that property would be. You're not going to get the best quality tenant. You're not going to get the best rental. You're not going to get equity uplifts if you get you're not going to be able to release equity to the best of the potential of the property, because a valuer will come in and say, this place is gross. The date does matter, but it's important to understand that all properties can have great depreciation deductions if they've been renovated or improved over the years.
Yep. Okay, perfect. And then I guess I might skip over it a little bit, because I know next episode I want to do tax depreciation schedules for property owners, everything you need to know. So I want to go through benefits of depreciation schedule cash flow over time. So we'll keep it sort of a little bit high level. Obviously cut all this stuff out. But essentially, to summarise it, the Quantity Surveyor, I'm getting in touch with one as soon as I purchase the property. Do you even think it's worth before, and if I'm comparing a couple of properties, just to know my options with, especially around the date of it and what I can and can't do in terms of?
I would say yes, but I would hesitate to say yes, because I wouldn't want someone making a decision on property A versus property B because of the deductions. If they're houses side by side, in the exact same street, everything's identical, but maybe one's had some different improvements, then that might be a deciding factor. But then it could all come down to the negotiation. Okay, we can get this one a little bit cheaper, or what have you. So I think it's important to know your numbers, and that's where depreciation comes in. So even pre-purchase, you can get an indicative idea that, say, you'll get between, say, $4,000 and $5,000 worth of deductions, and then you can go into it with an idea about what your after-tax cash flow would be. But really, you can't claim the deductions until you own the property. So we like to be engaged just prior to settlement, so we can ideally get an inspection done straight away after a settlement, ideally before the tenant goes in. The majority of our inspections are done with tenants in place, but I just kind of think if you've got a new tenant moving into your property, it's not really nice to have a weird looking bloke like me come in with a clipboard and a camera, so we may as well get in while it's vacant. It's easy for everybody.
Okay, but what's the difference between doing it then and doing it, say, May coming up to the end of financial year and for tax time?
These days, not that much.
Okay.
Back 2017.
Yeah.
I forgot how.
I was going to say,
how old I am.
Yeah, I was in nappies. Yeah.
Back when it was black and white. You don't need to rub it in, but back in the day, we used to like to get it done straight away because it was a snapshot of what was there. Because sometimes people would actually rip things out, and you used to be able to claim 100% of the residual value. That's a technique called scrapping, but doesn't necessarily exist anymore. So if let's say you buy it in October one particular year, yes, you can absolutely wait until May, June the next year. You only really need to get the report done by the time you meet with your accountant. But part of the reason why I say get it done straight away is because we've analysed 1,000 residential purchases, and we found that 6.7% of people waited so long that they missed out on deductions. So to give you some context around that, you can backclaim 2 financial years worth of deductions, right?
Yeah.
So these are people that waited more than 2 years and they missed out on some claims.
So 2 years after doing work or 2 years after claiming a particular item?
After purchase. So
after purchase.
So more than 2 years after purchase. And what that essentially meant is that the average person in that sample of the people that missed deductions, they lost $20,537. So at the time, we had a journalist coach us on clickbaity style articles, and they said, like, how about what would that mean across the total investor population? And it worked out to be $2.88 billion worth of free money for property investors just floating in the ether.
Well, I can see the headline already for that property.
Yeah, it's catching, isn't it?
Yes, definitely $2.8 billion for
now that it's a lot, and I always like to say, like, that's probably a nuclear submarine, or I don't know how much they cost.
A wind farm,
a propeller or something.
Yeah, half a wind farm. Yeah.
Well, wind farms I think are good. Nuclear submarines arguably are a waste of money because we don't seem to be able to buy them very well. We bought the Collins class; they were rubbish. We tried to buy it from the French, then we annoyed them. Yeah. So the government has a good track record of wasting money. Yeah. So don't give it to them. Like, if you want to give it to anyone, give it to a charity.
True. Definitely good use of money. Okay, so tell me though, with doing this depreciation stuff, your own property portfolio. I know you've got a couple of you've appeared on a lot of property podcasts. You've got a couple of your own. You're a very active property commentator. What's the property investing story or scenario with you? You know, in terms of property count, or what's your strategy around that?
Yeah, look, my wife and I decided quite some time ago that we weren't necessarily going to talk about the numbers of properties and those sorts of things, but I'm always happy to talk about sort of the fundamentals that we look for. Mm-hmm. And I think also the number is the wrong conversation. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people invest in property with all these ego metrics, like, I want to get 10 in 10 years or 30 before 30.
Yeah, I think there's a book with that title.
Yeah, there probably is. But I think that's kind of like the wrong approach, and it's a bit like Instagram. Like every average post on Instagram is just kind of almost conspiring to make you feel miserable about yourself, right? Because there's always someone with more money who's better looking. I don't know. You're a pretty handsome bloke, Dave. But
okay.
This is an audio podcast. What a waste.
Yeah, definitely.
We've got video somewhere.
I've got a voice for radio. I'm not sure about the face. But yeah.
So like, do you have 2 well-located growing properties that are worth $1 million each, or do you have 10, shit boxes that are 180 grand? They don't really do anything but put a few bucks back in your pocket. So I think it's important to see through some of that BS there. But
definitely,
my philosophy has always been around land to asset ratio. So I like to have as big a land component as I can. Mm-hmm. I own some townhouses, but not units. I prefer houses. Yep. I tend to favour more regional locations rather than high purchase prices, just from a diversification point of view. And it might be surprising to note that none of the properties that I own are depreciation monsters, right? Because people sort of will ask me, what should I buy for the best deductions? And I tend to describe the worst investment property you could think of, like a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex of 300 with a gym, a swimming pool. 6 lifts. There's a place in Melbourne that I did years ago. There were 6 lifts and they were worth $1 million each. And you think of the strata fees, like, put hair on your hairs. Yeah. The deductions, amazing, right? Absolutely amazing. But do you want to minimize your tax, or do you want to buy an asset that's going to compound grow over the years? So at the end, you've got freedom tickets. That's what I think money is. It's kind of freedom tickets. I'm not terribly impressed by it. Yeah, but it's time and it's opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think if you're looking to buy or make a purchase, especially investment property, and depreciation is what's the seller is selling you the property on, especially a lot of new house and land packages, as you know. I think you're definitely making the wrong decision, and you need to rethink that you should not be investing to be able to depreciate and sort of celebrate losing that money. It's good, as you said. I think you touched on it in the first couple of minutes of this interview. You said that it's a good bonus and addition to add on, but it should never be one of your, top or main reasons for making a purchase. So let me rephrase my question in terms of, and I totally agree with you, because I know there's buyers agents and there's people out there that have in the 20s and the 30s of properties. But I mean, again, as you said, if they're going to be townhouses, that are returning or costing money each week, and there's no capital growth, and they run into all those issues. How beneficial are they going to be compared to a few established houses on bigger blocks, well located, that are growing in capital growth every year, maybe neutrally geared? So let me rephrase this to you. I suppose in your investing journey, where are you at, and how close do you have an investing goal? Do you have an end goal? What does the finish line look like where you go, you know what, I'm done, I'm finished, we're happy, we're comfortable, or I've reached that end goal?
That's a great question. I suppose in my head, I compartmentalize it. I pretend that I don't have a business. I just have a property portfolio.
Yep.
And then at the same time, I pretend I have no properties and I just have a business. So I try and focus on them independently. And at the end, I'll work out this schism, this split personality that I've created, hopefully, or I'll see a psychologist.
Yeah.
But then we'll just go, oh, look, surprise, you've got a portfolio and you've got a business, so there's value there. So, I mean, the goal is something that is pretty fluid for me. It kind of changes. Where am I at? I'm still in acquisition mode, despite...
Really?
Yeah.
When did you buy your first property?
That was mid to late 2000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So
So I would have been, I was not an early starter. I would have been in my 20s, which, like, you listen to a lot of podcasts. It's like, I bought my first one when I was 11 and, I had 10 by the time I was 18.
I had 16 jobs. I bought my first house when I was 11.
Yeah, I lived on 2-minute noodles. And
yeah. Drove a bomb of a car. Okay, so you started investing a little bit later. So, if you're three and a bit years into this, I dare say you're still in acquisition phase?
It was mid to late 2000s. So that was, so not 2020, 2000. So it's quite some time ago now.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm thinking you're 2020 and I'm like, okay.
No.
Okay, but you're still in the acquisition phase early 2000s.
Absolutely. So I'm still in acquisition phase now, right? Look, I'm at that sort of point where I'm a little bit more critically analysing what's in the portfolio, but certainly still acquiring. And I think for anyone that has the opportunity to purchase property, I think you'll regret not getting in the market in this next little while. There's all of the fundamentals are pointing to strong growth for property. We've got, a huge undersupply of dwellings. We've got what seems to be record international migration. We've got a rental affordability crisis that the state politicians just seem to be making worse and worse. That's a whole nother episode.
Oh, that's another podcast in itself, rental caps and that kind of thing. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm in my early 40s. I'm still having fun. I'm still going to be working for at least another 10 years. So, I mean, that's still plenty of time for me to build things up. And then hopefully at the end, I can sail off into the sunset. And I'd like to do some, philanthropic stuff as well. It'd be nice to do something to leave a little bit of a legacy for the world. I mean, that sounds a bit grandiose. I'm not going to help us get to Mars like Elon, but it would be nice to say lock out some habitat for native wildlife, or bequeath some money to charities that support people going through domestic violence or depression or something like that.
Okay, interesting, because you have started you've got your own podcast and that, so I feel like you've got sort of like a legacy that you can look back on and have a laugh on, especially a couple of those earlier podcasts that you can look back on. So you're saying your sort of property philosophy, and everyone's got their own different stuff, so it's just interesting to pick people's brains. Would you say you're looking to once you finish the accumulation phase, you'll leave that for a bit of growing, and then sell a couple down, pay off the debt on the rest? Is that sort of the general gist of it? Yeah,
the idea is to build a certain asset base and then pull it back to the point where it's cash flow positive to an extent that you could potentially be living off the results of that. And then, of course, the business is a different sort of thing. So I've got a relatively modest portfolio for someone in this game, but it's a bit like the mechanic's wife's car is always kind of broken down. I'm focusing much more on other people's portfolios than I am my own. I'm probably a more successful business person than an investor, but it's something in the last probably 24 months that I've been focusing on a lot more, and I plan to be very busy acquiring in the next 12 months.
Perfect. Okay. Well, that's interesting, and I can't wait to see and hear about how you grow and how you go through that. As you said, very interesting times in the Australian property market in the different states, and the recipe that's brewing and building up, interest rates, migration, housing supply and demand, and that kind of stuff. Sort of on the quantity surveying side of it. So I've got here, you're close to probably 20 years in that game now. Is that sort of accurate?
I try not to think about it because then I just feel old.
Yeah.
I started my business in 2011 and I was managing a tax team at another business for a good 7.5 years. I think I was there. Yeah. So it's starting to add up, isn't it?
It is starting to add up, but it just shows you're qualified to speak about it. You've got your skin in the game as well, owning your own investments. What's some of the? I'll always like to ask people sort of what are some of the horror stories or the worst things you've seen in terms of, I don't know if it would be applicable for you guys in tax depreciation and that kind of thing, but have you had any sort of nightmares or any stories worth telling on the podcast of clients, or maybe it's people that have let so much money out of their reach or something like that? What comes to mind?
Oh, there's been all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I mean, I was nearly bitten by a dog that I realised could only speak French, and I was trying to negotiate it with basic French because I was learning it from a CD. So there's things like that. And here's a tip: don't say to a French dog "je regrette," because that's French for "I'm sorry." Yeah. It didn't really pacify it at all. I don't know how useful that is to any of your listeners. But in terms of a horror story, I talked about those missed deductions figures and the average person losing 20,537. In that samples, there was a lady who purchased a unit off the plan, so a brand new apartment, which is great for deductions. And she waited 16 years to get a depreciation schedule done.
16 years?
Yeah. So we're talking in excess of $50,000 of missed deductions. So what would that be in her pocket? It could have been $20,000 of cold hard cash that she could have had. Now, of course, we
all up or each year?
That was all up.
Okay.
So we helped her to back claim 2 financial years. I don't know the end of the story. There are some times where accountants can go back further, but that sort of stuff keeps me up nights. And if I always like going on podcasts, but assuming I woke up this morning, I'm like, I don't know about this Dave guy. It's stories like that that make me go, I've still got to share this message because I hate the idea of people missing out.
Okay, so you can go back, you can backdate only the last 2 years.
2 financial years, yeah.
Okay, good to know. Didn't know that. And there's potential that there's a lot of people out there that have missed that opportunity and have left a lot of money on the table that don't understand what a depreciation schedule is and how they work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Despite me prattling on about it for years.
Yeah.
As you say, you've seen me around for quite some time.
Yeah, he's been around for a while.
Yeah, I'm roughly saying variations of the same thing. These are entitlements that you are able to claim, so get it done.
Okay. Mike, I appreciate you coming on. That's a pretty good summary in terms of who you are, what a quantity surveyor, what a QS does, and depreciation reports. I'm sure we'll have you back on to talk about depreciation schedules, your specialty. But I appreciate you coming out and joining and jumping on the Everything Property podcast.
I appreciate it. Congrats on the success. And I'd love to come back.
Thank you so much.